When we think of samurai, it can be very difficult for us not to think of the legendary weapon that they would carry. This legendary weapon I'm speaking of is the two-handed longsword, the katana. But when we think of samurai as only carrying a katana as their bladed weapon, are we limiting our way of thinking? Are we perhaps thinking too small? Well, what's up, Internet? Dyce Quirk here, and guess what? Today, we're going to be going over the 5 swords of the samurai, and that's because typically when people think of samurai, they only think of this one type of sword, which is the katana. And so in this video, I'm going to talk about all 5 swords, identifying what they are. I'm going to talk about the characteristics of each so that you can differentiate them yourself if you happen to run into a sword. And also, number 3, how they were used in battle, so you can know why they were important to the samurai. So, let's not waste time and let's get to it. So, to start our list, we're going to go with the most widely known out of all of the swords, and that would be the katana. And part of the reason why we're starting with the katana is because it gives us something to compare to when we talk about the other swords. That way, you have an easier time identifying a katana versus the other 4 swords. And also, I was really surprised, but I went around asking people, like 50 people, do you know what a katana is? And none of them could even tell me it was a sword, let alone a Japanese sword used by the samurai. So, if you're somebody new and you're learning this for the first time, awesome. That just means you're going to know way more than all of the other people that know basic information about a katana. And if you're somebody that already knew a lot about katanas, perfect, because maybe you'll learn something new here, or you'll be able to identify it easier compared to all of the other swords. So, let's take a look. The katana is considered by some to be one of the best designs for a sword in the world, and it's actually considered by many, except for maybe those 50 or so people I mentioned before, to be the most recognizable symbol of Japan in the world. So, with it popping up more and more in pop culture and other forms of media, it's been gaining more and more attention. But what exactly is a katana? So, to start off, let's look at the name. Katana actually comes from 2 words, which is kata and na. Kata means side and na means edge. So essentially a katana would be an edge that would always be by your side, which makes a lot of sense considering a samurai would always have the katana by their side to protect themselves. A few characteristics that differentiate a katana from other blades would first off be its curved blade. As you look at this katana right here, from the tsuka, or the handle, down to the edge here, the tip, you can see there's a little bit of a curve in the blade. And this is actually created in the forging process. Essentially, when a blacksmith was making a katana, they would take both hard and soft metals, and they would continue to fold them over each other and hammer them down. Each time they folded it, it would actually double the number of layers inside of the blade. And so this actually took a lot of time, and it was a very arduous thing to do. But after they had finished making the number of layers that they wanted inside of the blade, they would take different types of clay and they would brush it on the metal of the blade. Some places would get more clay, some places would get less, and after they had finished putting all this clay on, they would dip it into a solution so that it can cool down. And because of the differing amounts of clay and the different types of clay, it would cause different portions of the sword to cool at different rates. And so the back of the blade would cool much slower than the tip of the blade or the edge of the blade, which would allow the edge to have a really sharp edge that maintained a sharp edge even after being used, and the back of the blade would be incredibly strong and also had a huge layer of softer metals that would absorb impact and make the blade lighter. So, definitely an awesome design. But in addition to that, a katana, another defining trait, is its length. This is actually kind of a decently sized sword. It's not the longest on this list, but it's definitely a good length. Essentially, a katana would be about 3 shaku, which would be anywhere from 3 to 4 feet in length, and the hilt would take up 1/4 of the length of the entire blade. And fun fact, a katana would always be worn. Let me grab this real quick. A katana, when worn by a samurai, would always be worn with the edge facing upward. This is so that when a katana drew their blade, or when a samurai drew their katana, they would be able to completely bring it out of their saya very quickly so that they could do a quick draw and potentially a quick kill. And that'll actually be important later, so remember that. Now, when it comes to the katana's use, it actually would be used primarily outside. It could be used inside, but theoretically it wasn't the best sword for that, and so there's another blade that we're going to be talking about in a little bit that was much better for that. So, let's move on to the next blade. Next, we're going to talk about tachi. Now, the tachi is actually the predecessor to the katana, and because it's the predecessor to the katana, it's actually sometimes very difficult to differentiate a traditional katana from a traditional tachi. Now, there are a couple ways that you can separate the two, though. First off, a tachi usually has a much longer hilt as well as a much longer blade. So a tachi is typically around 27 to 31 inches in blade length, whereas a katana traditionally is only around 24 inches in blade length. And also, if you look at a tachi versus a katana, you can see that the curve on the back of the blade is much deeper on a tachi. So a katana usually has a blade depth or a curve depth of about 1 inch, whereas a tachi is just deeper than that. And also, because of this deeper depth on the back of the blade, as well as the extra length, the tachi is most optimally used for slashing, as well as most optimally used on horseback. But because of that extra length, even though it's more optimal to use on horseback, it is almost completely useless when used indoors. So, there's a little bit of a trade-off there. And because these tachi were not able to be used indoors, some samurai would actually take their tachi and they would either shorten it or break it. They would take either a broken one or one that they just wanted shortened and have it made into a katana. So the next question that most people would ask is, well, Dyce Quirk, if I have this blade that's been passed down in my family, or I found this old blade in some random place, how can I tell if it's a suiage, which is a tachi that's been shortened down to the length of a katana, or was a katana all along? I can't really tell because of the depth on the back of the blade, so is there any other way I can tell? Well, there is. So, remember that little fun fact I gave you before, where I said that a katana would always be worn with the blade facing upward, and as it turns out, a tachi would always be worn with the blade facing downward. And so a blacksmith, whenever they finished making a blade, on the tang of the blade, they would always leave their signature, or their me. Now, the me would always be signed on the side that was facing away from the katana user, or the tachi user. So if it was a katana being worn blade facing up, the signature would be on this side of the tang. Now, if it was a tachi, blade facing down, the signature would be on this side. So, if you wanted to help identify an old blade and see if it was a suiage, again, a blade that's been shortened down to the length of a katana, or a regular katana, you could check on the tang and see first off if it's authentic or if it's just a cheap replica, but also check and see if it is a suiage or a katana. So, that's a little fun fact for you. And the third sword I want to tell you about is the wakizashi. Now, the wakizashi was a short blade anywhere from 12 to 24 inches in length, and if it was closer to the 12-inch length, it was called a ko wakizashi. If it was closer to the 24-inch length, then it was called an o wakizashi. Now, the wakizashi would almost always be worn in combination or in tandem with a katana. And this combination of a katana and a wakizashi was called a daisho. Now, daisho translates to large and small. And so technically any combination of two blades where one was longer than the other could be considered a daisho. But because samurai were required to always wear a katana and a wakizashi daisho combination whenever they were on duty, this is the most traditional form of daisho that you'll ever see. And in addition to that, because at the time there was a mandate that stated that anybody that wasn't a samurai wasn't allowed to have a blade over a certain length, the wakizashi could be owned by commoners, but commoners could not own a katana. So, if you ever saw that daisho, or that combination of a katana and a wakizashi, you almost certainly knew that the person carrying them was a samurai. And in addition, the wakizashi has its own special place, because a wakizashi is almost invaluable when it comes to fighting indoors. So a katana, where it's technically usable indoors, it's not nearly as effective as the wakizashi. And so also, there was a tradition at the time where a samurai, whenever they would visit somebody or be a guest at someone's home, it was respectful to the host to show that you trusted them by giving your katana to a servant at the front door. But they would never let go of their wakizashi, which already was much more effective at defending oneself indoors. So, there's a little fun fact for you. Let's move on to the next blade. Next, we have the longest sword on our list of the 5 swords of the samurai, and it's called the Nodachi or the Odachi. Now, the Nodachi or Odachi translates to great sword or field sword, and the name ain't kidding. Honestly, this sword was primarily used, almost exclusively used, in open fields by foot soldiers, and it was incredibly effective on cavalry. Now, how, you may ask, was it very effective on cavalry? Well, first off, the sword was 6.5 feet long. This was a huge sword. In fact, it was so large that traditionally it couldn't be unsheathed on the battlefield. So you would either go into battle with it unsheathed, or you would have a servant that would come along with you and they would help you unsheath it when the time came. Now, the sad part is this monstrosity of a sword, although it is so freaking awesome, it didn't last long. It was very short-lived, and that's because as the evolution of combat just continued to move closer and closer to large groups of infantry, it became less and less effective, and so they had to move on to other things. And so, let's move on to the last of the 5 swords of the samurai. And the last of the blades of the samurai that I want to share with you is the tanto, or, you know, maybe this would be better defined as the knife of the samurai, because a tanto is only 1 shaku in length, which is about 6 to 12 inches. And so, the tanto primarily was used for stabbing, but it could also be used for slashing as well. And unlike any other sword on our list, a tanto blade wasn't limited to 1 edge. In fact, a tanto blade could have 1 or it could have 2 edges. And in addition, the tanto shares another unique characteristic with the wakizashi, in that it would be carried everywhere. Whether you're going to the bathroom, whether you're entering a house as a guest, this would come with you at all times. And in addition, the tanto has a variation of itself called the yoritoshi. And the yoritoshi basically just had a thicker blade, and so it was specialized in piercing armor. Now, the tanto blade, as well as many of the other swords on this list, as it came closer and closer to the Tokugawa period, or the Edo period, these swords just became more and more ornate, and eventually became a decorative item. Kind of like in modern-day Japan, a lot of swords are used for either warding off evil, or to wish good luck to somebody that just accomplished something, or somebody that was going into a new part of their life. And so, now that we've talked about all of the 5 different swords of the samurai, if you've learned something new in this video, I want you to take your favorite new thing that you've learned and let me know in the comments. Also, if you found this video informative or helpful, or maybe you just like how we put it together, then please let me know by liking this video. And in addition, if you're interested in more samurai-related content, in the description of this video, and also in the pinned comment below, I've left links to all of our other samurai-related content. And lastly, if you're interested in more Japan-related content in general, why not consider subscribing? Honestly, you can change your mind later, and honestly, we're all about helping you experience Japan. We take tons of time to research and then cram it into these shorter videos so that you can learn as much as you can in as short of a period of time. So, thank you so much for watching, and Dyce Quirk out.